My name is Peter Mantello. I'm a professor of media studies in Japan at a university called Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University. And for the last decade and a half, I've been researching the intersection between emerging technologies and culture and society. In the beginning, I was very interested in video games, and I focused mainly on first-person shooter video games, not only because I love playing first-person shooter games, but I was interested in how this new medium was starting to overtake film and television. And from that, I kind of segued into the artificial intelligence, first in a field called predictive policing, kind of like in the film Minority Report, where technology predicts where crimes will take place, but also who might actually commit crimes. And then from there, I became interested in emotional artificial intelligence. And I've worked on several projects as a principal investigator, looking at the cross-cultural effects of emotional artificial intelligence on various communities, specifically Japan, but also the UK, and now with Germany. I'm actively working on a project with an institute in Germany on emotional AI in the workplace. So essentially how artificial intelligence is reading but also evaluating people's emotions in the workplace. Emotional artificial intelligence, the term, is actually a commercial term. Emotional AI is a subset of artificial intelligence, and it's one of the fastest growing subfields of AI. Essentially what it is it's machines that can read and evaluate people's emotions. And the technology was pioneered by a woman called Rosalind Picard from MIT, who's a professor, but also CEO of one of the biggest companies in the field, which is Affectiva. Essentially, the technology uses biometrics to read people's emotional state. And the way it does that is by measuring someone's heart rate, their respiration rate, facial micro expressions, the way in which they walk. All of these things are calculated through machine learning and sensors to sort of gauge people's emotional state at a certain time. The technology is used in many fields today. It's used in cars. Legacy cars are using it to detect whether or not a driver is stressed or drowsy, and but also it is used in next-gen smart toys. It's used in advertising. It's used in healthcare. The applications are growing every year. Well, you know, this is one of the biggest questions that many scholars are wrestling with right now, because the science community itself has not been able to agree on exactly what emotions are. There's one side of the science community that believe that emotions are hardwired into someone's physical state. So our psychophysical state is determined by our biology. And then there's another group that believe that emotions are socially and culturally contingent. And depending on the culture you're in, emotions will be defined in various different ways. And, you know, through our own studies, what we've learned is that some cultures have many different categories for, let's say, sadness or happiness. So in order to find this idea that emotions can be made computable is, for many critics, problematic. And also the problem is that emotion recognition technologies, many of these companies use facial recognition. And many of the templates that the facial recognition technology is premised on is based upon what is called Ekman 6. Paul Ekman was a sociologist who traveled around the world in 1980s, and he decided and came up with a theory which is called the universality of emotions theory, and he believes that there are 6 basic emotions that all cultures have around the world. Problematically, that theory has been debunked, especially with current pushback from many sort of civil liberties advocates who say that facial recognition technology, especially when it deals with people of color and minorities, is actually oftentimes incorrect. So, there's a lot of criticism right now whether or not emotional AI technologies are actually viable, or whether or not it's just another form of AI snake oil. It's a good question. There's, again, two sides of the argument, very polemic right now, right? There are people that believe that managers can make more objective evaluations of their team members, right? The problem with managers today is that they're normally very busy and they don't have time to interact with every one of their team members or employees. And so part of the idea behind emotional AI is to get a more objective opinion about an employee's affective state or emotional state at a certain period of time. And with that, the manager will be able to pick a good time in which to interact with the employee, and better understand the interpersonal communication process with that employee. So that's one side that believes that overall emotional AI can create a socially harmonious workplace. Now, there's another side. The critics believe that people that are under surveillance, which is emotional AI, it's a continual part of observing a worker in a very sort of like continuous way throughout the work day. Studies have shown that people that are placed under that type of surveillance oftentimes have anxiety, stress, and that instead of creating a more harmonious worker-employee relationship, it actually erodes and can threaten the type of trust that is normally associated with employee-employer type of relations. The first one that comes to mind, an example that comes to mind, are call centers. You might know, or you might have had experience with people who you know that might have worked for call centers. It's actually a very difficult place to work, and it's one of the highest rates of turnover, where people go and they try out working for a call center as a customer service representative. But let's face it, when people call a customer service representative, they're never calling to say how wonderful the technology or how wonderful the service is. There's always a problem. And so during the course of a day, a customer service agent might go through a lot of emotional stress. And so using the technology in a managerial capacity, right? A manager can go to work, turn on his computer, and he'll see little thumbnails of each and every one of his team. And the teams can be quite large, right? They can be up to 50 to 100 people in a call center at one time. And by looking at each one of the thumbnails, he will see a color-coded relation to that customer service agent. And colors are usually coded: red meaning high degree of stress, green meaning that the employee is actually happy and he doesn't have any stress. So if the manager sees that some of his employees are engaging in or have a large degree of stress, he can simply reroute calls and tell that employee to take a break. Now, on the other side of that, the manager could also use that to have a performance evaluation of that employee. And if there's a possibility that he might say that that employee is not really good for the job, so the employee might get fired. On the flip side of that, the technology is also being used for customer service agents to gauge the emotions of the person on the other side of the phone. Because as we all know, much of personal communication, human-to-human communication, is visual, right? So we read the cues of the person we're talking to. We can see their body mannerisms, their facial expressions that help to communicate what that person is feeling at a certain point of time. Well, a customer service agent doesn't have that luxury because normally he's only talking to someone on the phone. But through the technology, because the technology uses voice tone, right? So people's voices are calibrated to certain emotions. If I talk in a really high voice, right, it can tell us something about that person's emotional state. Or if I talk in a very strong voice, that can also tell me something about that person's emotional state. So these emotions have been coded towards certain colors. So as the customer service agent is communicating with that customer on the other side of the screen, he can get a better idea of how to manage the conversation. So that's one way in which it can take place. The other way emotional AI can take place is through what's called DIY wearables, where the company will give out people certain wrist tags that read the biometrics of the person, and the person is asked through a prompt throughout the day to say whether or not they're happy or they're sad. And so this information goes to all the screens in the workplace. So all employees know or have an idea of the emotional state of their fellow employees at any given time during the day. And the idea behind this is that sharing is caring. But, you know, it's problematic because if we think about emotions and how complex emotions are, to color code an emotion, either happy as orange or sad as blue, is very reductionist, right? So it sort of glosses over the idea of the complexity of human-to-human relationships. I have lots of concerns, but let me just give you a couple of those concerns. Generally, when a new technology is introduced into society, people generally don't question it. Because we always think, or we always equate technologies as being objective. But the problem with technologies is that they're never really neutral. And so what we normally see as being a scientific revolution can oftentimes be very misleading. And my go-to point is the 19th century science of phrenology. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but phrenology was considered to be a science. And that meant that it was an objective way to read someone's emotions or their behavior or their innate personality by simply measuring the circumference of the skull. And this was, for many years, considered to be very objective truth. But as we all know, it turned out to be a pseudoscience. And so there is a possibility that emotional AI may follow the same right. Instead of measuring the exterior circumference of the body, it measures the innermost sensitive, intimate part of a person's subjective being, which is their feelings. So that's problematic. The other problem with it is that much of what emotional AI harvests from an individual is known as non-conscious body data. Your respiration rate, your heart rate, your facial expressions, your skin perspiration level, your voice tone. Oftentimes these things we're not aware of it. And yet these emotions are this biometric data is being harvested from us, oftentimes without our consent or awareness. So that's another problem. Another problem with it is the algorithms that are encoded into these technologies. Algorithmic bias is very, very problematic because algorithms are only as good as the humans who code them. And oftentimes human bias is a great part of the algorithms that decide certain characteristics of people. Because with algorithms, they put people into categories. And so you might find yourself in a category just based upon certain non-conscious data of somebody that you're not really a part of, right? So that could be another problem with it. And then there's the question of data. Who owns the data? Does the workplace own the data, or does the person themselves own the data? This is something that is also an issue that's being sort of sought out in the legal field. And also, I would say, data management. because data that's harvested from a person might be used to gauge the performance of that person, but it might also be used later down the line as a recruitment insight. So various data constellations might be used to see whether or not someone is a candidate for employment or a candidate for a managerial position. So any constellation of data could be used. You know, that could be, for example, which ethnicity or age is most compliant to authority, or do women take longer washroom breaks than men? I mean, all of these things might be used as a way in which to decide whether someone gets a job or not, or whether someone gets a promotion or not. What comes to mind is Cambridge Analytica and the exploiting of emotions in political communication. In both the 2016 US elections and the Brexit vote, certain data brokers, specifically Cambridge Analytica, used micro-targeting as a way in which to influence the emotions of voters. And so this type of micro-targeting in itself can play a very strong role in influencing not only public discourse, but the whole electoral system in our liberal democracy. Cambridge Analytica is no longer around, but there are many other companies working in a very similar way around the globe, influencing elections around the globe. We know about this term sentiment analysis, right? Well, sentiment analysis deals with people's emotions. And so emotions are a very important way in which people make decisions. It's probably one of the most human experiences we can have is our emotions. And emotions have a way of influencing not only our decisions, but our learning, and also the social relationships that we cultivate. So in terms of politics, emotional AI can play a very strong and influential role in shaping public discourse, but also political outcomes. That's the hard question. How do we regulate new technologies? You know, it took a long time for governments to regulate cell phones while people were driving. I think over a decade before they decided that driving and talking or texting was very dangerous. But fortunately, I would say some regions of the world are very concerned with AI and the implications of AI on people, trying to ensure that it is human-centric. Europe, for example, is one of the first regions in the globe that has come out with law called the AI Act to force companies in which to abide by certain regulations that ensure that human interest or human-centric interest is being carried out in the production and development of these technologies. Unfortunately, in other parts of the world that are driven by markets and market innovation, like in many parts of Asia or even in the United States, we have what's called a market-centric approach, where regulators are very hesitant to regulate the technology because they want a chance for the technology to grow before they do so. So there's opposing views on it. Generally speaking, most countries that have economies that they feel need to be developed are more keen to have the technology. So it's much harder to enforce any type of regulation. I live in Japan, and Japan, although it does have certain laws that guard people's data privacy, they have been reluctant to come out or follow step with a AI Act like Europe, even though the greatest amount of data that travels between one country to another country is actually between Japan and the EU. They have a data information sort of relationship, probably one of the biggest in the world. However, Japan is very reluctant to regulate the technology now. So they have what's called soft law, which sort of gives guidelines to developers without any sort of penalties imposed if they break those guidelines. So, it's very ambiguous in Japan right now. I think the sad answer would be no, we're not prepared to deal with it. I think there's still a lot of disagreement on the use of, for example, ChatGPT and how to use it. It's a very polemic argument right now. Many educators want to ban the technology. However, it is very difficult to ban the technology. Once the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, it's very hard to regulate the technology. Part of that problem is that it came very quickly. Within 2 years, the technology had sort of became global, I guess. And so educators are wrestling with the idea, is this a tool or is this an obstacle to critical thinking, right? Because that's what universities are supposed to do, train people in practical ways, but also train critical minds to be critical. Now, there's one thing to be digitally literate, which means to operate a computer or a cell phone. It's another thing to be critically digitally literate. What critical digital literacy invokes is a discourse on the technology. How is this technology used for power? How is it used to shape a person's autonomy or agency? What are the benefits of the technology? What are some of the downfalls of the technology? I think in general, I predict there are going to be much more courses in the humanity to deal with these issues. And hopefully at some point in time, universities will come to an agreement on how to use the technology. For example, I go back to mobile phones. Many schools around the world now are simply banning cell phones in school because they have a very addictive quality to them where students simply cannot resist answering their phone. They keep their notifications on. And it does very much detract from the learning process. Maybe not so much in university, because universities generally try not to police students, but simply in elementary schools and public schools, children haven't really formed their sense of maturity. The frontal lobe doesn't develop until a person's 21, so there's reasons why people don't drive until they're 16 or 18 in some countries, and they don't allow alcohol until 21. I think the same thing with young adults. They need rules and they need certain limits to what they can do in the school. And so I think the issue with AI we're facing is not an easy question. It's a critical question. And if I can give you an example right now, I'd like to do so, is that in my last semester, I had students, as part of the evaluation, were to do some group presentations. The idea of working together, creating a subject, and coming up with some slides, and each one of the group to participate in sort of narrating a part of that presentation. And out of 10 presentations, I had 10 amazing presentations. Too amazing. They were too good. And so afterwards, I had to wrestle with the decision, because I knew it was ChatGPT. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Yes, they did have to get together. They did have to research the material. They did have to ask ChatGPT certain questions. But in the end, did they really learn anything from it? And so it's a question that I'm wrestling with right now.